Hi everyone, Anne Bounty from Said With Love, and welcome back to my channel. And this is the October's tips and tricks videos for the Barn Star Sampler Quiltalong. And we are at the pointy end, ladies and gentlemen. So excited to have finished with those large blocks and then even the medium-sized blocks. And we're now on to all the smaller ones, so the little 8-inch ones and then some 4-inch ones. So excited. So I've done the big layout and decided what all my little blocks are going to be, and as you can see by the sneak peek behind me, I've started putting my sections together, which was so exciting. So what I have decided to do is finish all those little blocks. So instead of doing them over October and November and then putting sections together in December, December's a pretty busy time. I've got a family wedding that's interstate. We've got family coming for Christmas and all those sort of things. So I want to be done before then. So I have pushed ahead, and for October, I have done all of those 8-inch blocks and all of those 4-inch blocks as well. So October on the schedule was going to be making blocks 10 to 15. And then November was the 16 to 20, all those little tiny blocks. I've done them all. Once I got into it and once I decided on those exact fabrics that I wanted to do, I just sat down and just went for it. They aren't big, but one thing I had forgotten about small blocks is that they have small pieces. So there are a couple of the blocks, which ones specifically? Block 10 was pretty good, block 11 was pretty good, block 12 wasn't too bad, block 13 starting to get a few small pieces, block 14 was okay. I think block 15, the windmill, was when I sort of went, oh my gosh, I just want this done. Lots of small little pieces. And the thing with once you start getting small pieces in your blocks, your seam allowance is really, really critical. So definitely check your seam allowance. Make sure that you're getting the right 1/4 inch, because when you start getting lots of little small pieces, even a tiny little bit out on your seam allowance will add up to all those little seams into a little block. So one thing I was doing was going very much a scant 1/4 inch, so just that little bit less than a 1/4 inch, so that by the time I've done all my folds and my presses and things like that, even if that block was then just that smidge bit over, I could trim it. And I'm so past worrying about whether my points are all going to be. When I start showing you all my sections, you will see that quite a few points have been chopped off and all the rest, and I don't mind, I don't care. Once it's in a quilt and it's been quilted and it's on the couch or the bed and being snuggled under and used, nobody's going to notice any of those points. So tips and tricks for this month is going to be a bit big, because I'm going to go through each of the different blocks, including the blocks that were scheduled for next month as well, show you my fabric pools, start to show you what those blocks look like. And then November tips and tricks is going to be showing you all of the how to put all those sections together and any tips and tricks that I have for that. So that's the plan. Let's get to it. So the first block, block 10, is the Ribbon Star, and this is what it looks like in Shelley's cover quilt. And we need to make 3 of each of these blocks. So I picked out some fabrics that would match quite nicely in with the rest of my quilt so far. I loved this little clamshell with a tiny little pop of pink, and put that together with the lazy stripe. I also used some of the stem of this more than the actual bird, but the stem of it, and I loved the matching the sort of the teal with this grey and the teal from Everglow, the neons. And for my third block, I used this lazy stripe again, but in this teal colourway with this purple and teal from Homemade. So they were my 3 blocks. This is a fairly easy block, thank goodness. It is the smaller size, so it is the 8-inch, but a square and a square for the middle, and then some flying geese. I did my flying geese 4 at a time, oversized, so I could trim them down because they're all the same, so it was nice and easy. And then just the corner blocks, and that was a nice, quick, easy one. 3 of them. Now doing 3, of course, always takes a little bit more time, but once you get the fabrics and you've figured out how to do a block, you know, what method, whether you're going to do 4 at a time oversize, or whether you're going to use the Fat Quarter Shop's paper piecing, foundation paper piecing for the flying geese, or just do them as per the book. Once you've decided that, then you can cut your fabrics out and head on and go for it. So that was my ribbon star block. So Mosaic Star is the next one, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 different fabrics, so 3 colours and your background. So there's a square and a square, 4 flying geese, and 4 HSTs. So this has got a little bit more to it, but still not terribly difficult. I think the hardest part of this one was choosing fabrics. So for this one, I started to use some of the Nightshade Deja Vu, which is this gorgeously rich pinky purple. My favourite dragonfly print, and I fussy cut a little bit of the dragonfly for the centre of the square and a square, and I just used the little fairy dust for the little bits on around the outside. For the second of the blocks, I used the fish background from my favourite hippos print. I used the Parisville Deja Vu ships for the little pop of pink, and to get a little bit of purple into this block, because where I want to put it in the quilt, I wanted to get all 3 of the colours, the purple, the mint and the pink. I cut the actual flowers, so I think that's it left of that fabric for me. I think that's the worst thing about fussy cutting, or maybe not fussy cutting a particular motif, but a colour, is that you end up with Swiss cheese fabric. So this is what part of my hippopotamus fabric's looking like. Oh dear. But anyway, it's worth it when I see my fussy cut blocks. So that's the second one. And my third one, I've used a little bit of the elephant print from Everglow, the mint fairy dust, and the grey with the purpley colours on it, or purple neon almost, from the neons from Everglow as well. So those are my 3 Mosaic Stars. And again, before you start cutting for these blocks, just make your decision about how you want to do your flying geese. I again used the 4 at a time flying geese oversized to trim down, and I actually used the Fat Quarter Shop's foundation paper piecing for my HSTs, because we're starting to get pretty small blocks now, so I wanted to get as much accuracy as I possibly could, and I used the foundation paper piecing for the square and a square. I've been enjoying doing those. They always get a great result. So that's my Mosaic Star. So the Ohio Star is next, and we're starting to get into some pretty small pieces in this block, but it is forgiving in that these points don't go all the way to the edge, so you've got a bit of wiggle room. So how I've been choosing my fabrics up till now is I had my layout, all my big blocks all on the floor, so that I could see what it was going to look like and see where the holes were for these smaller blocks, and started to go, well, I needed a pink one here, or a minty one there, or a purple one here, or some intermediate where I'm trying to get a little bit of the pinks and the mints together because it's sort of in a spot where there's both. So this one was an interesting one. I've started to get some kind of interesting looking prints happening. So one of my first blocks is grey all the way around and grey in there, and that's my background colour. The star points I did with this dark green geo, and I fussy cut one of just these Celtic knots without a bird, like that sort of thing in the middle. So quite simple in terms of the fabric, but quite stunning when it is finished in the block. Another one had my favourite little chipmunky squirrel pops of pink with a little bit of the fairy flakes just in the back here. I did grey on the outside, and to pick up a little bit more of that yellowy colour from the print, the lazy stripe in this sort of gold mustard kind of colour. And my last one of the Ohio Star, I wanted to use this dark print from Everglow, from the neons, using the purple as the background. So it's all the way around here because I needed a little bit more of that in my whole quilt. The star points are the cloud fabric from Daydreamer, and the little center bit is this little purple geo. So that one's quite an interesting one. It came out looking really good though. And once it's in the quilt, it will just start to make the other blocks that I use this purple in, it will just sort of make it all blend in together. So the difficulties with this block, I did follow the instructions for this block and cut the triangles. It wasn't too bad. There's a little bit of extra fabric out here. So as I said, it's quite forgiving because the points don't come all the way to the edge. So you can have a bit of fun with the smaller triangles and it's not going to matter in the end. Okay, so they were my Ohio Star blocks. Okay, the next one is this Weathervane Star. Again, with the fact that the points don't come out all the way to the edge of your block, you've got a bit of leeway. You're not going to get your points chopping off over here. So I used a little bit of a fussy cutting opportunity for my little center square here. I followed the instructions to make what Shelley calls her little house blocks here. But we are starting to talk about some fairly small pieces here. So accuracy in your cutting is getting sort of much more important. But as I said before, in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter if your points get cut off. Just have fun, enjoy it, and once the quilt is finished and quilted and you're snuggling under it, nobody's going to be too fussy. You'll start to see that I'm repeating a bit of fabrics because I wanted to make sure that if I had used a piece of fabric in one block, it was at least one place else on the quilt, sometimes two places else, just so that it doesn't look like I just picked something out of the stash and there's nothing else. You know, it ties in, it gives a bit of cohesiveness to some, as you'll see when you see my finished quilt, there is a lot of colour and things happening. So I wanted to try and get a little bit of cohesion. So that I used for these little centre pieces. I did a fussy cut of this print for my little centre, and I used the mustard yellowy lazy stripe for the outer corners as well. Then I used this lovely pinky purple one of the same print that I used the green, and that I've used in the corners. I did a little fussy cut of my little favourite raccoon print for the centre, and I used the lovely green minty dragonfly prints for the centre ones. While I had my raccoon prints out, I used for my third block the raccoon print for my outer little bits. I used this lovely pink and orangey one for here, and I tried to fussy cut the circle part so that it doesn't sort of look a bit off, and I just did a tiny little fussy cut of one of the hippos. I can't remember which one. It's a pretty small square, so I think I only got a snout on a bird or a butterfly. So Weathervane, a little bit smaller pieces. These little HSTs here are pretty small, but still just take your time and enjoy the process. Pinwheel Star is the next one. Now there's a couple of HSTs and there's a couple of stitch and flip corners, and the block is not too difficult at all. In Shelley's version, she's used quite a different background. I stuck with my standard grey background all the way through because I picked some fairly vibrant colours. So this lovely one from Curiouser and Curiouser, and a little bit of the pinky purple fairy dust. The bears, plus the cloud print, and that picked up that lovely little green, pops of green in that one. And then in this one, I was picking up sort of more the aqua teal background rather than the purple flowers, but I paired it with this really deep purple as well because I had used this in a few other places, and because it is quite dark, it's it was taking my eyes to that one block. So now I've got a couple of blocks with it, so it's just giving it a little bit more cohesion. Okay, so pinwheel block, I don't think there was anything terribly difficult. Quite a bit of pinning, obviously, so that you can get your HST block matching quite well with your seam in your next piece. But apart from that, and pressing open. When you start getting all these points coming into the center, pressing open is a great way to do it. I think Shelley in her book shows you how to flip your inside seams, but I actually don't like doing that, but it's personal preference. I just press open and it looked fine, and it's the blocks sat pretty flat. Okay, so the last of the 8-inch block is this Windmill Star. I've got to say, by the time I got to these, I was kind of over doing smaller blocks, starting to actually think, gosh, those bigger blocks were nice and fun and enjoyable. No. So there are some tiny pieces in this block, and whilst not inherently difficult, it does mean that if your 1/4 inch seam allowance is too big, too small, your pieces are not going to fit easily. So for example, this corner block, when you're doing those little 3 pieces with the background bits, once you've finished and you've pressed it in the direction that the book says, which works well by the way, give it a trim and trim it to its correct size. I did that, and even though I was trimming off just a little bit here and a little bit there, it made a big difference, and it made the block then go together quite well. The only other difficult part about this block is choosing your 2 fabrics here. Something that, I tried to get something that was in the same sort of colour way, but a darker and a slightly lighter print. Perhaps wasn't as successful as I had hoped, but I'll show you what I did. So for my first block of Windmill Star, I fussy cut out one of the little potion bottles from Nightshade Deja Vu for my central bit. I used the green with the little pink hexie for my little corner squares. And then for my 2 colours that went for these large triangles, so the larger triangle and the smaller one, and again, I just followed the instructions in the book and cut triangles. I was just very careful when I was sewing them together because obviously there's bias stretch on some of these sides, so you just need to be a bit careful and just don't handle them a lot. Cut them, sew them, press, not iron, and then try not to touch it until you've started to put it into your quilt. So I used these 2 prints. Yes, they're slightly different pinks, This is sort of more of a reddy kind of pink. This is more of a purpley kind of pink, but the contrast of them point quite well. And there is kind of a purpley pink, lighter shade background in here. So I think that one didn't go too badly. So for the second Windmill Star block, I used the very sort of yellowy part of this cloud print for my little corners. Tiny little fussy cut out of this Parisville Deja Vu pink. And then my two colours that I used for my triangles was my squirrel print or chipmunk print and the teal or the minty fairy dust. And that one came out quite well. It's the very last one. I did a tiny little fussy cut of my raccoon print. I used the suited and booted in the purple for the edge squares. And then I used this purple print for the large triangle. And I used the little purple geo for the small triangle. And I don't think there was enough contrast or difference in them. So that once you get sort of a little way away from that block, you can't see the difference between those two prints. But, you know, that's life. And I wasn't going to redo them. So they are my 3 Windmill Star blocks. I was very happy to finish those. And I did think about stopping at this point, like the schedule was planned to, and do the smaller little blocks, the little 4-inch blocks next month, but I decided I would push on and try and finish them all in this month. You, of course, don't have to do that. I'm going to talk through them all and what I've done, but if you want to keep your small blocks for next month, that's absolutely fine as well. The 5 small blocks are all the 4 inches in size, and they're sort of scattered throughout the quilt. Now, if you remember, we actually did some of the whirligig blocks very early on in the sew-along, just using up some of the HSTs that we had already sort of cut off from some of the bigger blocks that we did in those first few months. I went through and found a few more of those HSTs in my little scrap bag that I've been keeping of all the scraps and cuttings from all my previous blocks, and I made up some more of these whirligig blocks. I did decide that I wouldn't do any of these mill wheel blocks. I just couldn't face them. I was done. I've been ill. I don't know whether you can hear. My voice is not 100% yet. I just couldn't face this tiny, tiny little square and a square doing flying geese and that size. So I just decided they were not going to get done. So I didn't make any mill wheel blocks at all. I did, however, make flying geese blocks because they're nice and easy. I did 4 at a time, oversize and cut down, and I spread them around the quilt. I did a few sawtooth stars because, again, they were nice and easy. I mean, the flying geese are small, but again, I did them 4 at a time, oversized, cut them down. And I did quite a few of these little crisscross blocks because I had quite a few little squares that were left over from previous blocks as well. So they weren't too bad. You're doing them on point, so there are triangles to sew. So that's probably the most difficult block of the small blocks. For HSTs, sewing them together, if you press your middle seam open, you don't have too much bulk in the middle of those, so they're nice and easy. Once you've been doing all the flying geese that we've been doing in this quiltalong, this block shouldn't be too difficult, but again, it's small, so just make sure you're trimming to the right sizes before you put your block together, and then trim again afterwards as well. Flying geese, same thing. We've done more flying geese than perhaps any of us really wanted to. So with the crisscross block, there are, the little squares. That's fine. Now the cutting for these squares is to an 1/8 of an inch, so that's a little bit difficult. Hopefully your quilting ruler that you're cutting to has the 1/8 inch markings on them, So have a go with that. The triangles sewing, you sew them in rows. So there's a triangle here, a triangle there, a smaller triangle on either end, 2 triangles there. You press them together and then add the little triangles. And it's not too bad. These edge triangles, if you want to, you can find your halfway point of the square, halfway point of that side of your triangle to match them up. I did it by eyeball because it does make us slightly larger, and I trimmed it down to the size. So the fabrics that I used for these were all scraps. So I just popped them into the quilt where they would sort of fit or be a nice little segue between my colours in my gradient of my quilt. So I was very, very, very happy to get to the end of those. Feel free to go and do a mill wool block. I'd love to hear what you think about them. As I said, I was getting ill and I just couldn't face them. So that is all of the blocks from the Barn Star Sampler. I'll pop into this video some static shots of the blocks so that you can see all of those. And if you've got any questions, pop them in the comment box below or contact me through our Facebook Sew Along and Quilting group or through my Instagram. So looking forward to next month. So there won't be a reveal at the end of October. I will just be doing then the tips and tricks video for November, and that will be showing you the sections as we start to put them together, and I show you all of my blocks at that point. Hopefully all the sections will go together well. Wish me luck, and I'll talk to you soon.